Our next guest is Robert Reich. He served as President Clinton's first Labor Secretary. He was also a member of President Obama's Transition Advisory Board. He's now a professor of public policy at the University of California, Berkeley. I spoke with him earlier from Newsy studios here in Washington, D.C. Well, we wanted to have you on because you were instrumental in the Clinton administration, years where we experienced rapid economic growth. In fact, Biden's economy is growing at the fastest pace since the Clinton years, yet we didn't see the same sorts of negative aspects we're experiencing right now. So what was different then, and how did you prevent some of the negative impacts that we're seeing playing out in the economy right now?
Well, the biggest difference is the pandemic. This is a pandemic-created inflation that we are enduring. This is a pandemic, really, recession that we've just come out of. And so, really, we haven't had any comparison to what we've been through since the pandemic of the first part of the 20th century.
And I know you've been very vocal about how the Fed has been handling this, specifically on the idea of raising rates. Can you talk us through what your thinking is on that?
The Fed is trying to slow the economy to avoid inflation, and I understand that completely. That's what the Fed does. It's what the Fed is supposed to do. But in doing that, the Fed is looking primarily at jobs and wages. And the assumption is that jobs and wages have made the labor market so tight that it is forcing up prices. That's not the truth. The reality is that prices are being forced up, number one, by supply shortages around the world. Almost every country is experiencing the same kind of inflation we are experiencing. In fact, ours is a little bit less than the typical inflation around the world. But secondly, we're also experiencing price hikes because our big corporations have enough market power to raise prices without suffering just the loss of customers. They are using inflation as a cover for doing this. We know this because every measure of profit margins, that is the margin above the costs, how much profits there are, continues to grow. In fact, by some measures, corporations have not had such high profit margins in over 70 years.
Okay, so what would you like to see them do instead of raising rates necessarily?
Well, I'd like to see Congress. Now, the Fed really doesn't have the kind of control that I'm going to suggest, but I do think we've got to think seriously about a windfall profits tax. This is being imposed in Great Britain, for example. Other countries are considering it. It's very simple. It basically looks at companies' profits over the last 5 years or 10 years, whatever your time area is, and it says, okay, well, the last 3 years, if it's above that baseline, we are going to tax it by 40%, 50%, 60%, whatever the tax is. But we're going to assume that those are windfall profits. Those are not coming out of normal profit-making capacities. These are you're exploiting the situation that a lot of people are finding themselves in. These are profits that are not appropriate. They are windfalls to you, and consumers are paying the price.
And so what we're going to hear a lot in the fall, specifically from Republicans, but maybe even from some Democrats who are in tough races, is that this is mostly Biden's fault. He overdid it with pandemic relief. Then we have government spending, whether it's the infrastructure bill or more recently the Inflation Reduction Act. So what is your reaction to that? How much of this is squarely on the White House?
Well, I don't think much at all is on the White House. Joe Biden has handled it extraordinarily well. In fact, the Joe Biden White House has done a lot of things that will actually reduce inflationary pressures. For example, giving Medicare the authority to negotiate drug prices and get drug prices down. That's an enormous boon to consumers. It also means that inflationary pressures are reduced. That's a good thing.